We're going to start off the way I have with the other four. We're at the offices of Mr. Jim L. Gillis in Soperton, Georgia, the Soperton Naval Stores office, operating here since 1900, as the sign says out front. And I'm joined by my wife, Chris Pratt-Consoletti, operating the camera, hopefully well.
Hopefully well.
Miss Kathy Stiles sitting over on one side, and Mr. Bob Isler to my right. And this is the fifth in a series of video interviews that I'm doing as the historian for the Georgia Division of the Society of American Foresters. Idea came to me. I used to be a history teacher, then I became a forester. So as I'm getting older, I'm trying to put my interests together with my profession and do something for the good. The archives are stored at the University of Georgia, and these video archives, you get a copy, and then I'll put a copy with the division and then one up in the library in Georgia. So it'll be there for students or people of interest that want to see it on down the road. And I'm interviewing Hall of Fame foresters. So that's how I came by you, and of course I've known you, known of you, haven't met you before. But in this day and age, if you want to learn about somebody, you Google them. So I went on the internet and I Googled your name. Found out a little bit of information. So I thought I'd share that, and you can correct me where Google doesn't have it right. Gillis' name is synonymous in this area with supporting agriculture and public service. And it mentioned your grandfather Neil, who started this business, your father, Mr. Jim L. Sr., who was a longtime congressman and also worked here, and then you and your brother Hugh, who gave money to the Bruton Parker College for an athletic facility, and they got your picture here. And that's, I imagine that's
Mr.
Hugh.
That's right.
Okay. And who are the other two gentlemen there?
I have no idea.
One is the president of the college.
President Smith and his assistant, I don't, I can't call his name, just, he was from Texas, and he was, worked with the Alumni Association. But he's not there anymore, but that's Dr. Smith.
Okay. Oh, then I also Googled, well, I got some information on Trutland County, which I thought was interesting. So just for the video, I thought I'd share a little bit about Trutland County. And I have a Georgia Studies teacher over here who helped me out as well. So when I said Trutland County, she said, oh yeah, that's named after John Trutland, first governor of Georgia during the Revolution. And he was a Salzburger. And then, of course, I had to go through what a Salzburger was, and she went through that, and he moved. Well, he was a Salzburger, and this county was named after him. And then it also talked about a Mr. Fowler, the cotton farmer in this area who back in the early part of last century planted 7 million pine trees on 10,000 acres of...
In the 20s.
In the 20s?
20s and 30s.
Okay.
That's before we recognized that we had to do something with this submarginal farmland. And he was one of the first that planted pine.
Yep.
In these submarginal fields, they originally started the pine plantation business.
So the article said that that drew national attention and also drew the attention of Dr. Charles Hurdy over in Savannah, who was experimenting with pine, to use pine for pine pulp for newspapers. And so apparently he used some of the trees of Mr. Fowler with some of his first experiments.
That's right. He furnished the first trees used for Dr. Hurdy's experiment came from Trutland County.
And then it finally goes on to say that the Soperton News was the first newspaper printed entirely from pine pulp. I thought that was pretty interesting. So I'm in a historic area, Bob.
Sure. Sure.
And before we get started, Bob Isler, I'm going to let you say a few words. Anything you want to say about Mr. Jim L., or your association with Trutland County or here?
Well, I'm a native Georgian and have known the Gillis family for many years. And actually, there is a branch of the Gillis family in Waycross, which is my hometown. So my daddy and Mr. Jim L. Sr. were actually good friends, because my dad was a leader in the Democrat Party for 45 years until he finally turned it over to somebody else. So,
Wow.
so we've had our families have had an association for a long time. Of course, Jim L. is one of the most distinguished graduates of the Warren School of Forestry and Natural Resources that we've had through the years, and has had a long history of supporting forestry, both the school as well as the industry, the American Turpentine Farmers Association, as well as being the long time chairman of the Georgia Board of Commissioners for the Georgia Forestry Commission. So Jim L. Jr. has had such a integral part of the development of not only the school, but the Naval Stores industry, as well as the Forestry Commission and its service to the state of Georgia. So he's a very special person, and I'm glad we're getting this on tape for future scholars.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Jim L., could you just go over some biological facts? Where were you born? When were you born?
Well,
Where you went to school?
first of all, I'm say I appreciate the honor of you having this interview with me, and you asked for some corrections. Back then, my father he was not ever a congressman. He was in the state House of Representatives and the state Senate.
Okay.
And, but I just thought maybe I would correct that. No, I was born in October 2nd, 1916, and lived in Truton County all my life. And I was primarily in the naval stores and banking business. Of course, Truton County at one time had probably 300 or 400 farmers, and now we have about 5 or 6. And it's changed, and we're primarily about 80% in timberland. Our business was mainly naval stores and farming, and mainly naval stores is where we made the money. So I was very had a lot of interest in naval stores. And of course, that you took pine trees to stay in the business. We bought land and planted trees, and it's been pretty well a lifetime effort, and one that I've enjoyed very much. And I say it's been our livelihood, and it's been seen a lot of changes. And I've been very fortunate. People have been good to me.
I should tell you that my interest in naval stores starts with this fellow, Chuck Place. When I moved to Georgia in 1981, interestingly, one of the first fellows I met was him. He was a Mississippi State, Mississippi State Forestry Association, as I recall. And you were on a tour with some Finnish foresters and came to Georgia Timberlands where I was working.
Mm-hmm.
And another fellow that I met pretty early back then, he was about as handsome then as he is now,
Oh, yeah, thank you.
was Chuck Place. And I used to be a teacher, so we talked about that. And he says, well, I know a fellow down in Tifton that you should meet, Eddie Powers, Naval Stores Conservation Officer. You should meet him. He's a heck of a guy. So at that time I recorded him. I didn't have a video, I had just a tape recorder. So I bothered Mr. Eddie for about an hour and a half one day, and he gave me quite a bit of information on naval stores. So the perspective I had then was from a Naval Stores Conservation Officer, and how he would go out and tell the farmers about increasing their diameter and what credits they could get, how much more they could get for each tree if they didn't cut trees above, I think the diameters kept going up 12 inches, and, well, actually they went down, 14 inches, 13, because the trees were getting smaller. 10,000 trees for a crop, and he talked about many, many crops that they had there. So I guess that would be one question I'd have for you. At one point in Troutman County, how many crops did the Soperton Naval Stores support, or do you know about it?
At one time, we operated like 50 crops.
Oof. When was that?
And that would be in the 30s and 40s.
Where was the still around here?
It was about 6 miles in the country. We operated 2 stills. We had our office and headquarters of our business was located 6 miles out of town.
Coal-fired grill, wood-fired grill, steam?
2 fire stills.
Fire stills. Okay. Were there any steam-powered drills?
No, not
stills
now.
up here?
Not now.
Okay. I knew that.
At that time, I imagine in the southeast, in the prime time, in that area, up until I believe late 40s, there were probably 2,600 fire stills.
My goodness.
And they made two products. One was spirits of turpentine and gum rosin. And of course, turpentine was a liquid. And it was used there either at first when transportation roads were not developed, it went by rail. And then after rail, then it went to the ports, Jacksonville, Brunswick, Savannah, Charleston, Wilmington, for export. A lot of turpentine and rosin was exported. And of course, the rosin was the big product out of it. And then they developed at Lake City a steam distilled process of making turpentine and rosin. And they could make a lot better product, better refined, and they could guarantee heating qualities of the rosin. And so that, and then they could buy they could pay more for the gum and make a better product than the small farmers, these people had the fire stills could operate, and it was, so they eventually went out of the picture, and it was all that way, but for a long time, after the Civil War on up, the chief manufacturing method was the fire steel.
I'm doing an article on naval stores for this project, another project that I'm doing, Mr. Jimel, on the history of what we're calling the Southeastern Section and now Society of American Foresters. Bob's going to help me out on it. And I've been trying to think of a good focus on naval stores and what that actually meant to not only the farmers but landowners in general down here as a forestry product. And I'm thinking it was really one of the first that forestry products, besides just firewood, pulpwood wasn't a product at that point. It was really one of the ways that you could make the trees a part of your livelihood. So it was. I'm searching for a word or a way of thinking. It was a byproduct of the woods that could be made part of a personal kind of like portfolio or business. Is that a good way to think of it?
Well, what you say is what it meant to the economy. After the Civil War, the South was desperate, and there wasn't but 2 things they could sell, and that was cotton and naval stores products. And of course, naval stores products was, up until the Civil War, was primarily in North Carolina, and that's where the first naval stores came out of Jamestown, where the settlers first moved in. And they were getting that from the pine trees up there, old trees, and they were making with retorts, and they were getting the tar. And I think that naval stores product was one of the first exports out of this country. And then they had heard down in North Carolina that if you scarred pine trees, they would run this resin profusely, and so they followed that. The naval stores business went to North Carolina. In fact, that's why North Carolina is known as the Tar Heel State. And then it went from what
Because of pine tar.
that's right. And so then they went in. Originally they found out they could scar that tree, so they dig a hole in the bottom of the tree and then scar the tree and get the resin and then dip it out, and then they take this gum and process the gum, and that's the way it got started. And of course, a lot of your migration came into Wilmington, North Carolina. That was one of the chief ports. And but then when they would, the method they were using was destructive. And then they process the trees for naval stores over a few years, and then they'd go in with a sawmill and make lumber out of the rest of it, and then they move on. So they moved into Georgia about late 60s, right after the Civil War, about 1870, and then they finally developed at the port in Savannah a market for turpentine and lard, and it grew from that and went into Florida. And Florida at one time was the largest producing naval stores state in the country. Then it went on from Alabama, Mississippi, and then to East Texas, for making the rounds of turpentine and cutting it, using the big trees for turpentine, cutting it out, sawmilling, and then they just left open land, burned it every year. And so that's when our reforestation started, about in the 20s, to do that. But as I say, basically the only thing you could sell was turpentine and lard and cotton, and that was true on up into World War II. I know a lot of these small farmers here would take the naval store's money and try to finance the farm operation with it. But you are correct in that thinking is it was a backbone of the economy.
So two driving forces from the period from the Civil War up until World War II,
Right.
turpentine and cotton.
Well, actually, to be honest about it, if you look at your cotton area, and you look at the farmers, and the number of people that were on the farm, that's the only place that was any employment, primarily out of any rural area. And in other words, my estimation of it, that we didn't get through suffering from the Civil War until World War II. That's when land prices, even in the late 30s, you could buy land for $5 and $10 an acre. And down in South Georgia, you could buy it for less than that. But then when World War II came, that people left the farms, and they were probably making $1 a day, and they were glad to get it. A lot of them left the farm areas and went to the city, and they didn't come back in a lot of areas. And of course, that's that. Then we started bringing in manufacturing, textiles, and making the employment. But I don't think we recovered from the Civil War until World War II.
You agree with that?
Yep. Absolutely.
Turpentine camps. I've heard stories about they were like entire communities, and they moved when needed from one crop to another crop. Can you tell me your experience with? Did you manage any? Did you manage people that managed camps?
Well, you had, they were, number one, you had all these people, primarily black, and they were hungry. They were walking the roads. They were looking for jobs, and you would have to furnish them a house, such as it was, and and then they whatever you could train them in. If they were a good chipper or a puller, tapping the trees, some of them were collecting, dipping. They had different talents, and you could, in the process of doing it, you could develop what he was qualified to do. And you had it was all very little mechanization. It was all mules or horses you had to use, and but it was all hand labor, and it gave people employment and a place to live. It filled a void that was really meant a lot.
So that pretty much is another activity that went on post-Civil War.
What you would do is you would, if you, in owning the timber, if you had a particular tract of timber that was maybe had 5,000, you put up 5,000 cups, you trade with this guy to you pay him according to what he produced. And if he was hard working, could do more. Some of them could work as many as 10,000. And but there again, it was a skill. It was hard work, but it was still a skill. It was still a skilled operation. You couldn't you have to train them to do these particular tasks in it. But as I say, at one time we had well over 100 families. That's farming and naval stores operation together.
As a product during the time that you knew about it, when did you start working actually in the business?
January the 1st, 1938.
Okay.
I graduated from Georgia in June of 1937. And I went to work with the state. I think with two of us out of the class got a job in Baxley. He was an assistant forester, district forester. And I stayed down there 6 months, and my father was involved in politics. And, there was nobody here to operate business. And it was, we had to Internal Revenue was wanting some records, and they didn't have records. Unfortunately, I guess, when I was at the university, I went through business school.
Oh.
And so I came back in 1938.
Okay. So you were in the business school at the university?
No, there's a separate school there. A business school there. Private.
Oh, okay.
School. That was on the side.
So your degree was in forestry then?
Yeah, right.
All right. I got another question. I wanted to interview Mr. Harley Landale, and I didn't get that opportunity. His family isn't providing interviews anymore. But if I did, I was going to ask him a question that I'll ask you. And that was what I hear about in 1937. He was one of the folks that spearheaded a group to go visit the governor to get more funds for the university because the government wasn't providing enough funds for the university to get quality professors in. Do you know any part of that story?
No, I don't.
You?
Oh, yes, it's in the book. You can read about it.
But it's, Holly and I, we went to the same class. He's a very, very dear friend of mine. And of course, I was on the board of directors of the American Turpentine Farmers Association with his father, Judge Harley Langdale Sr. And he's, but I'm sure that's correct, but I'm not familiar enough
Okay.
to give you, he can tell you more about that than I can.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, what about the school? What are any memories from going to a forestry school in the 30s at Georgia that you want to share?
Yes, sir. There's a lot. We started, of course, the school was, the original building was an old veterinary building. And so we went to school in the vet then, that's before they built the new school. And we had both the professors and Dean Martworth was the dean of the school. Mr. Bishop Grant was one of the, we had good instructors. Of course, we had a summer camp we attended and a senior camp that we had that out at on the Oconee River. My mind's a little blank right now, but we found out back then, of course, there was a lot then that we don't know now, but it was the nurseries and all that progressed. But they had a nursery on the Oconee River there in Athens, and jobs were hard to come by. And I worked at night in the summer, 40 cents an hour, and I thought I was getting rich. And we were pumping water. One of the Cordell brothers up at Milledgeville, they had a big pump out there over the river, and we were pumping water out of the river with a hand pump, and then we were taking in buckets and taking the water and watering the nursery with it.
Was it a 4-year course that you study? You know,
Yeah,
nowadays it's
Yeah,
two other years.
4 years.
Full 4.
Okay. Of course, a lot of the first 2 years you had, of course, they were subjects, English, history, a lot of chemistry, and all you had to take to go along with your forestry degree. And, but I think it's about 2,500 students up there. You knew practically all of them. And Woodruff Hall was kind of the headquarters. There might have been 10 automobiles on the whole campus.
1938. That's still Depression time. Roosevelt. What did you think about Roosevelt?
Well, that's a question that most anybody can give you an answer for. I tell you, the country was in the depths of depression, and we had to make some moves, and he was bold enough to do it, and he started, as you well know, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, where they built forestry roads. In other words, it's just a question of giving people a little employment. And Roosevelt picked his country up when it was down.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of things might have continued on that shouldn't have, but at the same time, that was the beginning of our making a little progress in this country.
When you know, I used to be a history teacher.
Incidentally, Roosevelt, my father, was a good friend.
Oh.
Yeah, and he visited with him when he went over to Warm Springs. In fact, Daddy was chairman of the Democratic Party in the state whenever he was in
Did your father ever think about, was he ever offered a job further up,
there.
like in his administration or anything?
He wasn't interested anymore.
Oh. One thing I hear about Roosevelt.
He could have gotten the patronage for jobs and projects
I'm
and
sure.
everything else. You had to see Mr. Jim. That's what they call him, Daddy, Mr. Jim. And Roosevelt told him, said, anything Mr. Jim wants down there in Georgia, you get it for him.
So he must have a lot of people coming up looking for jobs. Then.
So anyway, and the way a lot of that came about, Senator George over here had opposition, and George and Roosevelt didn't get along. And Camp ran against him. And so whenever the election came off, Senator George got overwhelmingly elected, but Camp carried Truman County. And that impressed Roosevelt. But but that was back then. In fact, we got several bridges across the old Coney River. With, in other words, whatever Mr. Jim wanted, Roosevelt, he told them there wasn't any secret about that. He gave it to him.
That's fascinating. I'd like to hear more about
Yeah.
your father's stories now. I mean, Democrats rule the roost for a long time.
Yeah. That's right.
So was he involved in any other projects, or
Sorry?
was your father involved in any other built projects around here, or anything that he helped get started?
Oh, quite a few, but I won't go into all of that.
Okay.
But in other words, other people that wanted jobs and all, he helped a lot.
Okay. Well, when you first started, I'm going to go back to you starting out in the business in 1938. What were some of your first duties that you had to do when you took over from your father, this business?
Well, he was, actually it was a business there that he had been operating, and then he got involved in politics. And when I came back here, I was a chief cook and dishwasher.
I see.
I had to start a set of double entry books in accounting. I had to hire and file. The labor wasn't no firing, it's hiring. And in other words, I didn't have any training. I got all of mine by experience.
Mm-hmm. That's usually the best way.
And of course, I had some good people. I mean, what we call wood riders. Actually, they would oversee the woods work, and they dealt with the labor pretty much, and kind of in charge of production. But you had to make all the decisions and that. And another thing was money. There wasn't any money then. There were a lot of farms. During the early 30s, the North owned the South. Between the Federal Land Bank and New York Life and Massachusetts General and different companies, these farmers and people had borrowed money and they couldn't pay it, and so they had land for sale. In other words, if you had anything at all, and you didn't have to make a down payment to buy property. All you had to do was to assume the debt, and then if they transfer it to you, and then if you paid it off, well, you own it. but it was, and then the latter part of my career, packed all the timber that we used for naval stores, we grew ourselves. But back in the 30s, 3/4 or more of it, we leased from different landowners and farmers in the area.
So you acquired, was it during your term as the president, was it during your time as the running the company that you acquired all the property at the Soperton Naval Stores?
Well, no, not all of it. Not all of it, because my ancestors, they came from Wilmington, North Carolina, down in 1819, and they got land grants, and then that went on from 1819 on up into 1900, and the state, and you could get grants, and during after the Civil War, there were a lot of grants issued. And this country through here, see, we were not Savannah, Augusta, where you had your waterways, Macon, you had cities, and this was as far as you could get in the country. We were in an area that it was called the Pine Barrens. That's the way they described the area. And there wasn't anything in 1825. Two salesmen out of North Carolina on horseback came through Georgia collecting where they staked some of the settlers. And it described going into Williamson Swamp, up around Louisville, on into Manuel County, and spending the night. They kept a diary. And they quoted, stated McLemore's Bridge there, and that's over on the Hoopie, that's not too far from where our property is. And then came over and spent the next night with a L Gillis on Pendleton Creek. And he was very generous to them and gave them breakfast and food, and then took care of the horses and wouldn't let them pay anything. Very generous people, very complimentary, and they left. But they, in that dive, they described it, they would ride 10 or 15 miles and see nothing but pine trees and wiregrass, not even a tree or twig. But it's that diary they published in Mississippi, I think Historical Society had it, and Swainsboro paper picked it up and published that diary. So I did read that where they had stint with the L Gillis, and they described this area as being nothing but just pine trees, and there would be a settler every 10 or 15 miles.
So the resource was here all those years. It just took people like Hurdy and others to use it.
That's right. Dr. Hurdy was, so I've been about, there's been a lot of progress made from 38 up to now, I can tell you that.
How did World War II affect your business here?
Well, World War II, it affected it a lot. The labor, after see it with World War II, they could, a lot of them were drafted and went in. All right, then they had these jobs that they could make a lot more money in Savannah, Brunswick, around the shipyard, naval, and they left for these jobs, which you couldn't blame them. Not only the naval stores, the particular farm operation, and as they brought in more manufacturing, higher jobs, and better educated, why they naturally didn't want to do this hard manual labor. See, but that was one of the and of course, eventually, of course, the last naval store was produced was produced, I think, 2001, and I produced it. And I produced it on our place. And, but the main reason it went out in the 70s and 80s, sawmill timber got to be, it got to be very valuable. And these farmers, and then the labor, as it got scarcer, it was less efficient. And then they were hard to get. And between that and then another big factor that caused the extinction of naval stores was People's Republic of China.
Mm.
They could deliver gum rosin and turpentine, which might not have been quite as good as our product, but almost. In Savannah and the ports on the East Coast cheaper than we could produce it here. So with that competition, and then the manufacturing plants and all the new better jobs and so on, it just, and then high prices for your timber products, and they didn't want to be worried. A lot of work, and the trouble people made. So the combination of all of it, it just wasn't feasible to produce it. And then we never were able to really mechanize it like it should have been. But we were on the verge of that. But at the same time, it still involved some hand labor. But we had developed a borehole method where you could use some machinery, and it was very promising. But at the same time, never did get in the production stage. And then as the production went down, the processing plants, we had probably 15 or 20 processing plants where they bought the crude gum. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them went out of business. They were in Jacksonville and Valdosta and Tifton, Vidalia, McRae, and as they went out, and then it got finally the last one was in Baxley, and it had changed hands, and it was they didn't have enough volume to warrant production, and of course without a market you couldn't produce the gun.
Turpentine is a byproduct from pulp mills, I thought was another contributing factor.
Well, there are three types of naval stores. Your gum naval stores, which we produce from the living tree. And you've got steam distilled, which is your stumps, old virgin
yep.
stumps. I think the only plant left for that now is in Hercules, and I don't know what Hercules, but it is in Brunswick. Mm-hmm. And then you've got your tall oil naval stores business, which is the residue of washing your pulp and paper mills. And they make a tremendous amount of rosin and turpentine, particularly in the areas where you got slashing on the pine. And that paper side is used in making paper side, a lot of it. It wasn't as of the quality that the gum naval stores was, but it was still usable. And then they made wood turpentine too. I don't think that timber producers ever gotten any credit for the naval store's byproduct of the pulpwood, but at the same time, the pulp mill made it, but they still didn't. Still make a lot of money out of it, chemically and that.
Yep. What my company does, Mead, now Mead Westvaco, is we basically use 100% of all the oil back in our plant. That's been going on for years. Whatever energy they can generate from the chips and any of the black liquor, green liquor, white liquor, they'll reuse. So that's kind of like a self-contained unit, and I understand how that all works. When did you retire? You're really not retired, apparently.
Well, we are strictly now just growing pine trees. And that's, it's right fascinating. And when you got to get your top dollar out of the tree, and of course I'm still doing a little silviculture work where I'm cutting out the bigger timber and leaving right, in other words, usually if I can set a 14-inch diameter and cut the trees larger than that and leave the bound and just perpetuate it. In some places we clear cut, but poles are still bringing an excellent price. And sawmill prices content, they are, I think, on the bottom probably right now.
How many acres do you manage?
Well, I imagine with what, from children and, well, around 14,000 acres.
Any thoughts on the way forest industry's lands are changing, where we're selling them all off? My company's I'm selling them off. That's what my job is right now, making maps of the land, making files that go on the websites, and we're selling our land that way. And it's interesting. The first company I worked for, Georgia Timberlands, hired me so they could make maps to sell their land to Merrill Lynch. It was going to be the first TIMO. It never worked. But I started with a company, and they hired me to run a GIS to make maps to sell land. And now at the end of my career, the company I have is selling their land, and I'm making maps to sell the land. It's kind of a bad circle. But any thoughts that you have? Well, how is that going to affect the resource on going out with industry not owning their land anymore? We just have the facilities, but not the land. Any thoughts?
Well, there's a challenge for a man that owns property now. And what is with the cost of government, I'm talking about the whole, from the federal government on down to your local taxes. And there's too much dependency on property. And at the rate it's escalating, a lot of people right now, you've seen what's happening from Atlanta north, and taxes just got high that people couldn't afford to keep the land just to pay the taxes. And that was true back in the 20s and 30s. These banks, people wouldn't loan you money on land, but they would on leases and all, because they could pay that year to year. But that philosophy then was you couldn't afford to own the land on account of you couldn't pay the taxes on it. And that's about the shape we're making about the 360-degree circle back where we were. It disturbs me. I'm not. I don't know how many times taxes have just tripled or doubled here in our local counties. And but you've got to have law enforcement. You got to have schools. But it's as I say, that we're going to have some other resources other than property. And so far that hasn't taken place. And what disturbs me is not where it is now, but where it's going to be 5 years from now. Mm-hmm. And and when you love the land and like to grow trees, and you've had it in your family for generations, and it's a serious question, and I don't know what the answer is.
We still got the R going on there, right? You're still recording?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have an answer either. I've asked people. I had a fellow from Weyerhaeuser come out to my local Pine Mountain chapter recently, Bill Guthrie, and his talk was on markets and how markets are going to be affected in the future. And his concern is that, like you mentioned, the cellulosic ethanol plant when I was coming in, you were talking to Bob, and his take on that is that it's not producing anything yet, and they have a lot of trouble getting that going. And the commission is touting that as really as a panacea of marketing our pine resource in the future if our markets go overseas and we can't produce it here. And I'm getting a lot of negative thoughts from Bob, from Bill Guthrie. I don't know if you have any on that, Bob, but I saw that as really a hope where we could be producing energy, be producing gasoline, ethanol, cellulosic ethanol. You can share with that if you have any thoughts. Would you think that's going to work?
I after having listened to Jim L for as long as I've known him, and listening to Harley, and watching the way our forest business is evolved and working in different states, I agree with you. I look at it as a hope because I don't look at this plant here in Soperton is making a something that's going to be a cure-all or anything. But what I look at is what Jim L. and what Harley have always said is that the salvation for the timberland owner, no matter who he or she might be, whether it's me, whether it's Jim L., or whether it's a corporation, is that you got to have markets. And if you don't have a market, then your timberland is going to be used for something else. And so the way I look at this new cellulosic ethanol, or the production of electricity by burning wood, or whatever that we can come up with, it's another market. And I'm a firm believer in letting the market play, and letting the free market work it out. And so, if we can't sell our pulpwood for a decent price, then maybe we can sell the same size trees for energy wood. So I look at it the way you expressed it, I think, very well, is that it is another hope that the tree farmer in the United States can look at, because it is another market that we can use. And I think that it's great because I don't see the Europeans being able to compete with us in that area. I do not see the southern cone being able to compete with us in that area. So I think it may be the thing that really helps us make it into the future.
Well, Bob, you're right about that. I can see that, because this ethanol was first started by using the residue. That's fine, but you've got most of that stuff after a sawmill operation. I don't know, with dirt, you got a lot of stuff. And I don't believe at the best you get over 15% of the volume. So they're going to have to go to these, to get the raw material, they're going to have to go to these living trees. And as I say, this county is 80% in timber. When the radius of 75 miles, they made an inventory before they put this plant in here. And it was amazing at the volume of wood that was available, of the number of acres in plantation. And so it's we are without a good market for the product, it's eventually going to come down to what you can produce off the land. This lease land value, it's all been speculation where they've driven these prices up where they are. But eventually it's going to come down, particularly in the rural areas where you get out of your real estate market, where what you can produce. If you go and got some money, you want to invest it. You're going to see well, what can I get as a return on my money? What percent interest and so on. And it'll boil down. And it can be, pretty well from the quality of the land or site index what you can produce, and then it's going to eventually boil down to what the land will produce as to what you can pay for it. And but if we don't have these markets, we'll only, in particular, with research, that's another thing that could bail us out. In fact, it's already trees faster and better than we were. And hopefully they'll continue the research program. But with that, we're gonna have to have a good market to survive.
One of Bill Guthrie's points was that he didn't think that there would be enough trees to go around. He thought that the different markets would be competing for the same trees, and where are we going to get the market, especially with some of the turnover, some of the land that's going out of forest that's being developed, or with all this industry land being bought and sold in the same day. A lot of it is going out of production. And his concern is are there going to be enough trees to support cellulosic ethanol and those pellets, the pellet mills that are going on.
Pellets, right.
The pellet mills that are being exported to Europe to help
For
them
the
meet
Kyoto
their Kyoto
Protocol.
Protocol.
Yes.
Do you think there's going to be enough trees to go around?
Yeah, my philosophy, and I have to, I can't take credit for this philosophy, but Marshall Thomas is a real close friend of mine, and we both got our MBAs at the same Georgia Southern University together, and although he's a Florida Gator by forestry training, but Marshall has a philosophy that the land will gravitate to the best manager. And so that really underlines that my whole point on this market thing. If the market is there, there will be enough trees on enough land to satisfy that market. And if that is not the case, then the land that's in trees now will be something else. As Jim L has pointed out, in the Atlanta market, what's going on there now is some sort of development. And you pick whatever it is, whether it's a interstate interchange or a golf course or a gated community or a strip mall or whatever. So that is the best use. People have decided with their money that is the best use of that land. And so if the market is here in the state of Georgia and in the South where we've got a lot of land for trees, then I think there will be enough trees to support that market. So I don't agree with Bill. He may be right in a very short term, like maybe 10 years or something like that, but I think if the market and the prices drive it to reward a person to invest their money in trees and buying timberland, then I think there will be, long term, there will definitely be enough of that. And what we're seeing in Brazil right now, because we've studied this, is that there is intense competition in Brazil right now between the agricultural industry and the forest industry for an acre of land. Because we're not talking about Amazon basin land, we're just talking about the arable land that's already there, because the Amazon is kind of hands off according to the Brazilian government. So whatever land you're looking at, ag is looking at it for soybeans and cotton and sugarcane and all that kind of stuff, and forestry is looking at it to plant eucalyptus. And so there's intense competition which is driving their land prices up, which are virtually the same per acre price in Georgia as what you'd have to pay for the land in Brazil. So I think Marshall is right that the land will gravitate to the people who manage it the best. And if the market is there, I think that we foresters will be managing it the best. And if the market's not there, then some ag person's going to be sitting here giving this interview, not me.
Yes, I think you're right, Bob. I'm not concerned about that, because we are producing more wood now per acre volume than we ever have. And I think if this ethanol and these other things work out, instead of working on what we call a life cycle of the tree from 30 to 40 years, it'll probably be down to 15 or 20. And with all these improved species and everything, why it'll probably that'll continue to increase. And and hopefully that'll take place. But I think this business of to wait 50 and 60 years for quality lumber and all this, that, and the other, that's a thing of the past. And, but it's, but we can grow trees, and we, as I say, you know, the improved trees that we've got now, even for 10 years ago, it's amazing what, from the standpoint of disease, volume, and all the heredity factors in it, they've done research has done a terrific job.
Okay. Well, we've got about a minute left, so Mr. Jim L., if you have anything else you want to say about the future or tell any stories about Bob, the floor is yours to finish up.
I'll tell you, I think my birthday is October 2nd. I'll be 92, and I think I'm going to leave it out for somebody else to do all the predicting. It's we've got this land all over the state, and it's just we can grow timber in competition with anybody, and we're going to have the fiber and all the products involved, and I think it's just going to, if we all the patience, it'll work out. It's a fascinating business, but it's not it's a slow business, but it's one that I've enjoyed. It's been good to me and my family. I've enjoyed every minute of my time in the timber business.
Thank you. I appreciate all this effort. Hit the R.
R. We hit the R. How about
Good.
R?
That's a good way to do it too.
Yes.